I uh, to just give a brief um, introduction of the chairs. Dr. Priyaleen Singh is a professor in the Department of Architectural Conservation at the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. She has a DPhil from University of York, and she has been a summer fellow at the Damartin Oaks Institute, Washington, D.C., and was awarded the first ISOLA Appreciation Award in 2023 for her academic and professional contribution to the discipline of landscape architecture. As a practicing conservation architect and landscape architect, she has worked on several urban conservation and historic landscape conservation projects and also authored several publications on these subjects. Mr. Divay Gupta is a heritage and conservation expert with 27 years of experience. He headed the Architectural Heritage Department of INTACH and is an alumnus of ECROM, University of Birmingham and SP in New Delhi. His restoration projects have won UNESCO SA awards. He is an expert on Preah Vihear, Cambodia, and was member of committee on WHS to ASI. He is a Fulbright visiting scholar at University of Pennsylvania. I welcome you both to the session, and I would now request Kimberley to start her presentation.
Okay, I'll just share my screen.
I would just like to remind all of you that you have 10 minutes for the presentation, so please keep that in mind. I will give you a reminder when 2 minutes are remaining.
Okay, is my screen visible?
Yes, yes, it is.
Great. So I'm Kimberley Moyle. I'm an Australian who's been living in the Spiti Valley and working in heritage conservation in the area for the past 9 years. I'm not an architect. My interest in this comes from a cultural conservation perspective. And my studies were in Asia Pacific Studies, which I completed from the Australian National University. So this article is actually about my personal experience and my work in the Spiti Valley. So the field of architectural heritage conservation is dominated by a concern for the preservation of monumental architecture that is considered of universal global significance and fixed in time. Vernacular architecture, that is the ordinary homes and architectural traditions of common people under certain conditions, may also be considered for conservation. However, in gaining recognition, they too become a relic of the past. Residents must necessarily retain the authenticity of their original homes, and modern adaptations are forbidden. Culture becomes fixed in the past. Vernacular architecture by its very nature, though, is dynamic and subject to change and adaptation as part of human culture that is lived in the present, but connected to the past. These highly localized architectural systems reflect a deep understanding of local ecology, climate, material science, bioclimatic design, cultural expression, and symbolism. Sustainable architecture that has been practiced and adapted over generations according to the needs of the homeowners and broader community. The intangible cultural heritage implicit in these architectural knowledge systems is arguably of immense worth, not only for its intrinsic cultural value, but also as a source of knowledge and inspiration for sustainable architecture more broadly. The ancient wisdom of vernacular architecture, passed down through generations of master craftsmen and women, in many contexts is no longer being passed on. These architectural knowledge systems are on the brink of being lost. Conserving these knowledge systems as living architectural systems is of critical importance. This article of mine is an attempt to bridge the gap between heritage conservation experts, academia, and cultural conservation practitioners. The discussion that I have chosen to take up is intended to encourage debate over the dominant voice of Eurocentric notions of heritage conservation that premise the partitioning of heritage as that which belongs in the past, removed from the present by its very virtue of its nature as heritage. I argue that the heritage in the context of India is alive and as much a part of present-day culture as it is a connection to generations past. However, human cultures are influenced by many forces, sometimes for the better and others for the worse. The traditional architecture of the Spiti Valley...
Kimberley, are you changing slides or are you still on the first one?
This is still the first slide. I'll come through.
Right.
This is just images, so we'll see this is the Spiti Valley. I'll take you to the next one so you can change. Yeah, thank you. The traditional architecture of the Spiti Valley is currently being shaped by many competing forces. Each of these will be explored and through the case study of our work, which is we are developing an alternative model of tourism development that showcases the unique vernacular architecture of the Spiti Valley, and particularly the skills, high-level skills and craftsmanship of the elder master craftsmen. So you can see here, this is, for those who are not familiar, Spiti Valley is located in the very northwest of the Himalayan range, and the valley is at a high altitude, as average of around 3,000 meters, and some of the villages are up around 4,000, above 4,000 meters. It's a high altitude, cold desert region, and has been recognized as a significant cultural landscape by the Indian government in 2015, when it gained recognition for its the unique nature-culture connection that the people have had for thousands of years. And it's been registered for recognition under a unique cold desert cultural landscape. Ethnically, the people of Tibet are Tibetan. And you can see, actually, it's in some places, the region is just 20 kilometers from the border with Tibet. Their homes are predominantly of rammed earth and stone. You can see in the next slide here what they look like. Rammed earth and stone with limited use of timber. Their homes reflect an in-depth understanding of their context, climatically, ecologically, and with regards to resource availability and optimal use. Each village shows minor variations in the construction techniques and more according to its context. So you can see in this example here, the flat mud roofs, and you can see the lack of tree cover in the area. So this in itself is an adaptation of a very frugal way of using scarce timber resources. I'll go on to talk more about some others coming on. So the vernacular architectural traditions of the Spiti Valley region have been practiced, adapted, and refined over millennia. The Tabo Monastery, a rammed earth structure established in 996 Common Era, and is still standing strong, and a testament to the long history and durability of these techniques in the region. Rammed earth remains the predominant construction technique, with Nako village being an exception, which we have in the next image on the left. That's Nako village. Where there is an abundance of stone, and as such has resulted in stone masonry being the normal construction method. And going on. The rammed earth technique practiced in the Spiti Valley has been adapted to suit local conditions and differs drastically to modern rammed earth. In Spiti Valley, the soils are intentionally unsieved. Only the largest rocks are removed by hand. Medium-sized stones are considered desirable both for their assistance in improving compressive strength, but also to prevent the often silty soils from cracking. The soil is slightly moistened before being transferred to a formwork. I'll just skip down and I will show you some images of, this rammed earth here. Medium-sized stones are considered desirable. The rammed earth is the least water-consuming construction method, and perhaps it's no coincidence that it has been selected for this high-altitude desert region. The soil is then rammed into the simple wooden formwork, and in contrast to modern rammed earth, it's rammed in a very light manner, simply by stomping on it with one's feet. This helps to reduce the high level of compaction and the thermal conductivity of the material, reducing the transfer of cold inside the buildings. Typically, the walls are between 18 to 20 inches thick, also helping to prevent the transfer of extreme winter cold. The need to survive the harsh winters in Spiti Valley has seen the evolution of highly intelligent system of bioclimatic design. Traditional homes have been constructed with a deep understanding of the regional climate as well as the specific site conditions. Certain design elements can be seen replicated in homes throughout the entire valley. Sorry, I'll just go back to here. Okay, so where possible, homes are located on hillsides with a south to southwest facing orientation in order to take advantage of passive solar gains. Winter rooms have lower ceilings to ensure the precious heat generated remains close to the inhabitants. And in the oldest homes, winter rooms do not have any windows. You can see in this image here that this is a plan of the original house that we are reconstructing. And there is a yokang in the center. This yokang is insulated on 4 sides by other rooms. So on the right-hand side, you can see they have a store where they would prepare their alcohol, arak. Then they have a granary where they would store their barley. Below that, next to that, you have a store where their baby animals were kept. And even 150 years ago, when this house was constructed, they had a dry compost toilet that was already part of the design. So in the front corner, you can see there's a compost pit on the ground floor for harvesting the manure. Then you have the entry foyer. Then to the left of the screen, but to the west side of the home, there is where they stored their animals. So they have corrals for their animals. And on the northern side, where it was mostly where they're known to have the coldest northerly winds, there are no openings that are given on the northern side, no windows, no doors. And it's used for storing their fodder. So they have a 2-meter wide fodder storage, which provides immense insulation for that winter room in the center. So this winter room is basically where the whole family would live throughout the winter. They would sleep, socialize, eat, cook. Everything happens in this one room. And it's, again, a way to maximize scarce resources for heating, such as timber and predominantly dried cow manure, animal manure that they use for burning. And
Kimberly, sorry, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Okay, thank you. So interestingly, they also migrate throughout their homes. And so they move from the winter room in the winter on the ground floor up to the first floor for their summer habitation. So it has much bigger windows, more light, open spaces, open central courtyard in the center there. So I'll just skip and show you actually our project, as our intention is to conserve the intangible cultural heritage rather than the built structures themselves. So we've taken on this house, which this is the original house here. And you can see it's a very humble house, 150 years old, before there was even glass in the valley. But that you can see the intelligent bioclimatic design, which is what we were hoping to conserve actually when we chose this property. So now we are reconstructing from the ground up. And this is actually what we have. So what our intention is for not for us to turn traditional houses into museums, but actually to keep the architectural systems as living knowledge systems. And so we have the elder master craftsmen, 2 elder master craftsmen. One is a carpenter and master carpenter, and the other is a rammed earth expert. And they're both in their 70s, and they've been working with us on this project, and we've been documenting their extensive knowledge and techniques. And unfortunately, we've not been able to find young people to come and work with us on this project and learn from them, as they're moving into other careers. And there's a lot of competition from tourism for better incomes, and government jobs for more security, taxis for easier, less laborious work. And I'll just take you back. And why we were pressured, we felt the need to actually act, was because you can see the transition to modern architecture. So as people are getting more wealth from tourism and from apple farming and other, not so much at this altitude, but slightly lower down, the influx of wealth is seeing people move towards industrial materials. There is a lot of social status associated with an RCC structure, despite the fact that people are aware that these structures are completely inappropriate for this high altitude, extremely cold climate. People cannot live inside these structures in winter. It causes physical ailments, aching in their bodies, etc. And the durability of cement long-term is highly questionable as well. We're already seeing within 10 to 15 years damage in these structures. The quality of RCC construction is also very low. So in summary, the purpose of my article is to demonstrate that there is a need to conserve and protect the precious architectural cultural knowledge systems. They're under threat by modern industrial materials, and this is not necessarily because it's an improvement. Of course, cultures change and adapt with time, and it's quite normal, but there is also social pressure, and there is cultural dominance, I would also say, that's coming from urban contexts where it's privileged. The pakagar is seen as superior to the kacha earthen house. And this is something that should be contested, and people should be given respect and pride in their traditional architectural systems, so that not only can they continue to practice more sustainable architecture, but the rest of us can all learn from them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberley. I now invite Ashwathi to start presenting.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ashwathi.
Could you do a full screen?
Just a moment. Is it visible now?
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ashwathi. I'm an architect and an urban designer. I'm practicing as a lead urban designer under Urban Rejuvenation Scheme for the Ministry of LSGD in Kozhikode, serving as a special purpose vehicle. My paper, Heritage and the Contemporary Gamble, primarily looks into the urban heritage precincts and the development pressures it is facing, primarily on two cases. One is adaptive reuse and multidisciplinary approaches that has been affecting Mapla Bay and Comtrust. Mapla Bay is a larger scale and Comtrust is a smaller scale, but in a larger impact. And the paper also advocates for stakeholder engagement, heritage impact assessment, and collaborative frameworks to protect these issues that is both the cases are facing. Heritage is a matter of pride. There's no doubt about it. But the concern arises from the dilapidated condition of heritage precinct that is facing all these repercussions. So issues impacting long-term sustenance of such neglected heritage zones in a city are mostly subject to factors like lack of knowledge and functional and historical importance, increased density consideration, policy interventions, plot amalgamation, shift of culture and occupation, and many more. Now, a primary objective to managing heritage is to communicate its significance and need for its conservation for its host community, and at the same time, identify the fact that despite the efforts taken by the local governments and the local organizations, still there is lack of awareness that is leaving these structures left untouched or unnoticed or left to deteriorate. Now, along with these entities, we can also we need to also identify the fact that economy, society, and environment comes into play. So, urban spaces with heritage reminiscence are also part of the socio-cultural manifestations that relates to economic conditions and the political forces that is driven to the city's growth. So also shift of aspiration and other forces of transformation also leads to these kind of negligence and leaving these structures destructed for deterioration. As an urban designer, I also want to look upon placemaking aspects along with sustainable tourism, where heritage is always, in most of the times in Kerala, heritage is tied up to tourism entity and sustainable approaches or responsible tourism for that matter. But as an urban designer, placemaking with strategic, creative, and tactical approaches can be one tool that can be identified to make sure we can activate the place as well as manage the place. In case of Mapla Bay, this is Mapla Bay. Mapla Bay is in Kannur, northern part of Kerala. It has two prominent structures. One is under the ASI called the St. Angeles Fort on this area, and State Archaeology Department owns Arakkal complex that is on the other side of the bay. And at the center is a port that is transformed into a fishing harbor today, which means there is a fisherman community at the center of this area. Now, this is St. Angeles Fort, and this is one of the mosques that is part of the Arakkal complex that is there in the fabric. Despite the fact that this is only 3 kilometers away from the main city, people don't know about the location or lacks knowledge about the location, which is why there's less visitors in these two heritages. To make a notice of this area, I started learning about and investigating the heritage and the prominence of this or the significance of the location from 2013 as part of my bachelor's, taking it to my thesis and 2 years of taking it to thesis to the stakeholders, and again doing my master's in urban design to again bring notice to this location as part of the thesis. So these are some of the heritage entities that is left behind in the entire stretch where, as you can see, one of the images where the building is cut through, as part of the building regulation and widening of the road, the building was subjected to cutting it to half. And this is one of the petrol pumps that is right opposite to one of the identified heritage that is violating the heritage rules. This is Arakal complex that is left to deteriorate, and these are some of the snippets of the entire complex that you can see. Some of them are the old towns with old shops, and one of them is Arakal complex, and so on. So the list continues, and investigating more, I realized the fact that these many listed rules, regulations, and policies that comes under CRZ, building rules, Environmental Act, ASI, and conservation-based lines, ownership of fisheries department, harbor department, and the Malsefair, and tourism, and there is cantonment tied up to it, and of course the utilities also a repercussion. Looking at all these policies, yes, there is hindrance to development, but at the same time, every single policy tied up to these entities have loopholes to upbring or bring up nuances to say that let's rejuvenate the heritage here or safeguard it. To make it more solid, I took to heritage mapping as part of my study, where I identified some of the districts and some of the entities that is along this entire stretch. Now, sadly, there are many such leftover heritage that is nearly 100 to 200 years old. And the fact that only St. Angeles Fort and one of the entity under the Arakal Museum is under the listed heritage, and the rest of it is just left to decay. In 2006, conservation took place as an initiative for Arakal Museum as part of the Arakal dynasty, pushing it forward, where the state government initiated and UNESCO contributed nearly 1 crore to uplifting the Darbar Hall of this Arakal complex. And that's it. After 2006, you only see the same element left as it is with no renovation or no maintenance done. To understand more of how the role of Architectural Survey of India, Archaeological Survey of India is functioning in Kannur. It is a sub-circle functioning in Kannur, but the fact that St. Angeles Fort interventions that has happened over the past 10 to 12, 15 years is not addressed, or they don't have any solid justification for it. So to see that the transformation has happened more or less like a landscape intervention, to point out that one of the volts of this entity was changed to the pitch roof was changed to a volt. Inquired to the ASI, they refused to answer or to justify why this was done lately. Also, some of the information that ASI has provided as part of the visiting, they've located a third moat as part of the fort, but I tried locating it in the Google map or physically visiting the space or even looking back to the historical maps. I don't see a third moat. So when I inquired the same thing, the ASI officials refused to answer the same question. And at the same time, the primary moat was subjected to closing by the ASI for no reasons. Regarding the maintenance that ASI took towards the fort was also questionable, because in 2015 the defense wall collapsed in one of the sites, and even today it is left as it is. So the zero maintenance is done, despite the fact that ASI is subjected to yearly maintenance for these kind of elements, which is a nationally protected monument. So, like I said, it eventually started becoming a landscape intervention where they installed a light and sound show with seatings and speakers, which in itself started becoming a monument, turning out to leave it as it is. So, as part of the landscape intervention, accidentally they recovered some cannonballs in the premise as well, which was not documented after having gotten some limelights to the event that happened during that time. Taking to the city part of the Mapila Bay side, this is the Arakal stretch, and opposite to it is the warehouses, because trade used to happen in this entire stretch. Now, as years passed, due to widening of the road, the structures were collapsed and taken down to unauthorized entities coming to this area. So there's no zero documentation to this site, where there's no value put through it. Along with the tied up is, since there is functioning of fishermen activities happening here, ecological impacts also started happening to this area, where this entire zone of the city has wetlands that is channelized to have a small creek connecting to the bay. Now, what harbor engineering department did was they rechanneled the bay, which became a backyard, and all the
Ashwathi,
dumping
you have
started
two
happening
minutes
here.
remaining.
Yeah. So this also had a repercussion on the implications of how environment started affecting. So despite the fact that over the 9 years of my any answers given from any of the stakeholders, despite reaching it to the state level as well. Taking to scenario two, Comtrust. Comtrust is a weaving factory, and it has a significance because it was one of the it lies at the center of the city, and it has a significance tied up to the weaving factory that was established with a modern loom back in 1844 with clients from Buckingham Palace and Air India. Today, what has happened is in 2009, after the World War II, when the decline happened with the deaths of Comtrust owning the entity, it was halted. And in 2011 and 12, despite unanimous support, the bill was put and raised to the central government, and they halted the entire bill. Again in 2017, the effort took where the bill was again put forth, but then with zero interest because the city doesn't have enough money, or the Kerala government doesn't have enough money to contribute. It was kept again as left as it is. In 2022, architects of Kozhikode took an initiative as a competition called YAF, Young Architects Festival, where they raised the concern and put forth a competition to see how we can envision to upbring this entity. Luckily, sensitive designs came in, but again, because of the legal disputes with the ownerships, again, this was again sufficed. Now, one major consideration is that the entity was sold with only 1 acre of land left behind and the rest of it under the land mafia, because of which nobody has the money or the power to claim back the entire entity. And the workers who's suffering right now is the only entity who is holding this behind and saying that we need this back and the government needs to take over the entire entity. Now, government doesn't have the money, and so is who is going to struggle. So this entire structure has all the leftovers of age-old missionaries that is there that could be converted to a museum, but still it is under halt and under whose question is the issue. So the bill that passed nearly did not take consideration of the workers' rights or the benefits or the emotions tied up to the structure, and it was only subjected to commercialization. So the land mafia proposed for a commercialization of converting this entire massive structure to a mall, a commercialized mall. So that again is a lack of awareness, if I have to say. And to point out that the real estate interests are so powerful that the government lacks the financial resource to tackle this issue, leaving game changers a little time to take responsibility. That is all for my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashwathi. I now request Mugdha to start presenting her paper.
Yeah. Thank you, Parul. I'll just share my screen. Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. May I start?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Hello all. I'm architect Mugdha Kulkarni, specialized in architectural conservation, a doctoral candidate and a graduate teaching assistant at University of Auckland, and a lecturer on contract at Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand. This paper is drawn from my forthcoming doctoral thesis, an architectural analysis of Maratha sea forts of Konkan, India. The paper suggests the cultural resources associated with Maratha sea forts and evaluates how they align with the necessary criteria for identifying a site as a cultural landscape. It examines the concept and types of cultural landscapes in relation to the sea forts and advocates for a specific type that is appropriate for fortifications and military architecture. Introduction and some terminologies. Konkan lies on the west coast of Maharashtra, housing multiple sea forts. Under the initiative of UNESCO, the historic Maratha sea forts are tentatively listed as potential World Heritage Sites. Setting an international discourse. Restoration initiatives from the 21st century are Silk Road Revitalization and Project Mosam. They encompass a large maritime route affecting the conservation of Maratha sea forts of Konkan, especially Project Mosam.
Sorry, Mugdha, to intervene. I think your slides are not changing if you're changing them. I don't know if you're...
Oh, okay. Let me just check.
Also, if you could do a full screen, that would be better.
Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yeah, I can see the fourth slide.
Yes, that is with the long map here on the left.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. So, the sea forts are often acknowledged as singular entities of strength and glory, but they hold significant cultural landscape potential and need to be viewed as individual fort precincts, a cluster of immediate forts, and probably chain or a series of forts as a whole encompassing the entire Konkan region. In response to political and maritime needs, the Marathas established a network of sea forts to strategically protect key regions and to expand and defend their areas. These were some cases studied based on the natural settings. Trade demanded ports and their protection, with eventual establishments of fortifications since the ancient period. The forts were either newly constructed or existing ones from ancient times were enlarged to meet current needs. The political and maritime scenario and the architecture and design of sea forts went hand in hand. It is amazing to see how the existing locations were continued to be used by different rulers. While the sea waters were a source of political unrest, it was remarkable how effectively the natural water pockets were utilized for defensive purposes. The architectural contributions and their influences were studied. The theory of appropriation and its associated term cultural appropriation were used. The seaforts possessed an immediate and multifaceted relationship with water, and the architecture kind of complements the adjacent geography while blending the built environment with the natural landscape. This integration reflects human ingenuity in adaptation and use of natural resources for warfare, making them clearly defined landscapes designed and created intentionally by man. These sea forts were used in continuity and evolved according to cultural practices. They can also be viewed as organically evolved relic or fossil landscapes based on the uncertainty in consistency of the ruling powers. Now, these are some glimpses of some of the sea forts and their diverse evolutions. I'm sorry, some images are blurred here for copyright reasons. Each sea fort bears a strong cultural significance in the form of contributions made by each ruler, as well as the overall culture of the functioning of the sea forts and the surrounding landscapes. Such cultural resources need documentation and research contributing to the potential cultural landscapes. These elements include use of water outside and inside of forts. Of course, for the primary function catering to the fort, as well as recreational purposes, like in the case of Janjira, which is a non Maratha fort with Indo Islamic influences. Also, water playing a strategic role in case of Sindhudurga, where portable water wells were used as secret passages to the outside. Another aspect of Sindhudurga was use of Portuguese masons where
Mukta, sorry, are you changing slides? We're still on the fourth slide.
oh my god, okay. Should I just stop sharing and share again?
Yes, you can try that.
I'm so sorry. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. These was just some slides that I skim. I can just skim through again. So there were Portuguese masons who were used in construction of the Sindhudurga fort, probably to make use of the Portuguese strategies and construction techniques, contributing as another cultural resource. All this is challenging to exactly identify individual precedents in style, but are unidentified cultural resources. Similarly, historic, archaeological, and ethnographic resources shall help identify tangible and intangible attributes to contemplate the fort monuments as landscapes that bear complex multiple dimensions which are yet to be examined. Many sea forts, especially in resource-scarce environments, incorporate sustainable practices such as rainwater harvesting systems, storage facilities for food, ammunition, and agricultural spaces within or near the fort. These elements show a deeper understanding of the natural resources available in the landscape. To enhance the sustenance of living and to strengthen the forts military wise, there is also a typology within the sea forts classified as main sea forts, secondary forts, and outposts, which are suggested by M.S. Naravne. So, such combination of sea forts were used for protection and administration and sustenance of the main fort. In spite of individual influences of respective rules in the establishments of sea forts, there are a set of commonalities that dictate the overall architectural tradition. This needs to be critically analyzed under the lens of cultural landscape, with careful retrospection of fortifications and military architecture. The definition unfolds a diverse range of manifestations of interactions between humankind and its natural environment. As discussed, the variable use of water suggests both function and aesthetics, enhancing the beauty of the landscape while reflecting the design ingenuity. So these are some publications which I have referred and used in the paper. Estrada Neminis largely deals with post-human feminist phenomenology, where how water connects us all and enchants several relationships is something which is intriguing. This effectively provides a lens to investigate the role of water. This lies in support of a defined geocultural region and their capacity to illustrate the essential and distinct cultural elements of such regions. So, such phenomenologies help to delineate a cultural region associated with the seaforts. Also, author Himanshu Prabhare focuses on intersection of history, archaeology, and culture, offering a lens of viewing waters and their associated heritage beyond national borders. So there is an imperative need for such a holistic approach. This demands a detailed study of the surrounding towns of Konkan and its communities would justify the case of seaforts being cultural landscapes. So such literature basically provided a different perspective akin to cultural landscapes. The paper also examines the freedom that the guidelines on fortifications and military heritage kind of provided, and but also suggests a need for separate type of cultural landscape which is specific to fortifications and military architecture. The most evident factor is that the same location for a fort was preferred by all the successive users and their strategies sculpted around that. So, this means that the sea forts leveraged upon the naturally available landscape for their strategic objectives in the respective political and maritime scenario. So, complementing the adjacent geography while blending the built environment with the natural landscape.
Mugdha, you
So
have 2 minutes.
yeah. So the other literature examined here also kind of suggests military installations, but I mean forts to be looked at as military installations, but as symbols of power and authority as well. Fortifications contributed to the creation and expression of power in different societies. Also, the role of fortresses as distinctive elements within urban greenery, highlighting their contribution to the uniqueness of a city's cultural landscape, addressing them as fortress landscapes. This is using Warsaw Fortress as a case study. So the Maratha sea forts of Konkan were largely evolved establishments as a defense mechanism to protect their native lands and surrounding waters. The Marathas who have mastered the inland war techniques were completely new to the maritime warfare that they later acquired. It is surprising to see the culmination of the political maritime turmoil, movements of culturally distinct people, and how they had the invariable influences and exchanges and ended up using water and the natural features, the surrounding natural features in similar ways, or maybe slightly different. This demands the study of cultural landscapes specific to fortifications. The available categorization within the given framework perhaps could be modified with respect to reimagining fortifications as cultural landscapes and their conservation. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mugdha. I now request Jan to start presenting.
Thank you very much for inviting me here in this session. My name is Jan Haenraets. I'm based at Boston University at the Preservation Studies program. I have a background as landscape architect and work a lot on historic gardens and cultural landscapes. And I have been involved in Kashmir since about 2010. And today's presentation will reflect on some of the questions from the call for the conference. And specifically, I will focus on the conservation of cultural landscapes, gardens, and especially historic urban landscape. And I will use the case of Srinagar, Kashmir, to point out a few things regarding how approaches have been evolving. So the main question I want to address in this very brief summary of my paper is how did principles and methods relating to landscapes evolve since the 60s, and how have these been implemented? And what lessons can we learn from that, or how can that inform also a potential future review of the INTACH Charter? So if we look at Kashmir, this is Srinagar with the river Jhelum. It's a very layered landscape. We have elements that date back to prehistoric times. There's numerous religious layers in the landscape as well, and in the architecture, from Naga cult to Hindu, Buddhist, Islamic, Sikh era, or Sikh expressions and dimensions. So a very complex landscape. And when we talk about garden making in Kashmir, we can say that around the 17th, 18th century, there was a peak in garden making during the Mughal period with important sites such as Shalimar Bagh and Nishad Bagh, and then also the cultural, more vernacular traditions and intangible types of heritage of the floating gardens. I have a number of these slides where I kind of give very quick overviews of how charters evolved, and what I want to point out for 1960s to 80s is basically that early charters like the Venice Charter focused strongly on monuments and sites. World Heritage initially focused strongly on cultural heritage. If we then have the first Australia ICOMOS Charter on Places of Cultural Significance, widened a little bit. The place was described as a site area or building or groups of buildings, and landscape was not in there yet. The conservation process became highlighted, and by 81 we had the Florence Charter on historic gardens to address some gaps in these charters that had a very strong monuments focus. If we look at the first UNESCO World Heritage sites in India, we also see a strong focus on monuments. You could say there were urban ensembles like in Fatehpur Sikri, or the Taj has, of course, its garden, but the focus in the selections was very much on the monumental elements rather than the landscape aspects. Now, if we jump to Kashmir and look at the 20th century, if we see the evolution since the first 20th century, the 1970s, and then into the 21st century, if we look at that, for example, as Shazmashahi, we see the historic landscape is dramatically changed, and tourism became such a factor, and so facilitation of visitors became important, and the garden's character has dramatically changed as a result, and we could question whether we ever studied or understood the historic landscape character of these places. We see that here at Nishad Bagh and at the bottom at Shalimar Bagh as well, where parts of the Mughal architecture, the Mughal walls of the garden at the bottom left were removed to facilitate some light shows, or we built in the garden itself restaurants or toilet facilities, and even remove significant buildings that actually maybe were post-Mughal, but contributed to the general scale and dimensions of the garden. A major impact was also urban development along Dal Lake. We see location of Shalimar Nishad here. These used to be right at the waterfront. Right now, Nishad is still near the waterfront, but the foreshore road passes over its first terrace, dramatically damaging that. And the northern parts of the lake were basically cut off, and we lost significant parts of the cultural landscape. We went from a more, you could say, vernacular character around the lakes, as we still see in Wular, to really engineered concrete foreshore roads, which recently under the Smart City initiative are even being further developed. Now, when we move towards late 19th century, late 20th century, we see INTACH being founded. The focus starts to emphasize urban areas and cultural landscapes, and the Borough Charter also adds land, landscape, spaces, and views to its definition. Tourism charters come up, and we see that also reflected in the landscapes. Importantly, as we know, by 2004, we have the charter by INTACH, but its focus was strongly on architectural heritage and sites. Important is that by only 2004, the INTACH Jammu and Kashmir chapter was founded. Yeah. That was at the time when we saw a number of significant garden conservation projects taking form. We know the Baghe Babur and Humayun's Tomb as important projects, and they set a precedent that also resulted in Kashmir in certain new projects. By 2005, we saw the first conservation management guidelines document for 3 main gardens, and then as a result, also the next year's several constructions and renovations happening at the gardens. But the focus in these projects was mainly on built structures and buildings. And we could argue also whether the real theory of the conservation principles was implemented here, because we see a high level of renovation. If we look back at Shasma Shahi, we see even that by 2009, new proposals were requested by the government for further development of the garden. These did not go ahead, but if this would have gone ahead, you can imagine what we get there. It's almost like a new, complete tourist site. As we move into the 21st century, historic urban landscapes as a city in its totality and all-encompassing becomes important, with community participation and intangible aspects being highlighted. By 2013, the Borough Charter is again revised, and place no longer speaks directly about buildings or built areas or landscape, but mentions that in kind of the small prints. But now it speaks about a geographically defined area with tangible and intangible dimensions. So we've moved on very much since the mid 20th century. Heritage and democracy at the 19th ICOMOS Assembly in Delhi, and then also rural landscapes as heritage were 2 important themes by 2017. But if we look at the urban vernacular city of the historic city of Srinagar, we see a widening of the roads, destruction of vernacular buildings, a city that moved from a landscape of water transportation to basically an engineered concrete city in actually a region where earthquakes is extremely important to think about. These changes are not new. We saw that also in the USA, where the city used a bulldozer, like they said, rather than the surgical scalpel. And cars just had to be accommodated, and that's what we see currently in many of our cities. Meanwhile, there were initiatives in Kashmir that started to raise the issues of heritage protection, not always completely implemented. But then by 2019, we get also major change with the reorganization bill, and then Smart City coming up as well as an initiative. Plus a new...
And you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you. The Srinagar Metropolitan Plan, also by 2019, was an opportunity to highlight heritage, but actually the proposals it highlights would cause even further damage. So let's very quickly, as the last few slides, look at Srinagar during the process of Smart City. we see all these contemporary alien proposals which have nothing to do really with the character of Srinagar. And as a result, if we look at a place like Shalimar Canal, I can only show one or two examples, but we see the character that existed there. And this is the proposal by Smart City. Gradually already some changes had been happening, but if we see this is just a disaster as a proposal, and the implementation of it also shows that this is actually towards the end of the completion of the project. And if we really think about what a step backwards this is for our cultural landscapes, it's a plain disaster. Nevertheless, the wider public engages and speaks on Instagram about the best principles of urban design and engineering, a city that celebrates modernity and tradition. So we should really question, what are we doing? If we really think about this, this is a non-sustainable type of development. There's no conservation principles, even though they already clearly exist, but they're not being implemented. The projects are developed in isolation without participation. Construction standards are poor. Understanding of place is completely absent, and the public should hold the right to participate, but that's not there. So with that, I question, is it too late to actually start saving a few of the last remaining historic Srinagar city areas, or even last remaining Dal Lake cultural landscapes? The area that I show here is now scheduled to become developed by the next Western Foreshore Road. So we will get exactly the same as what I showed in the other slides. So as concluding slide, what can we learn? Basically, I think if we are going to take cultural landscape seriously, it needs a change of mindset. There is a need of a shift in treatment of the conservation of landscapes of cultural significance. And I suggest that we really closely look at the INTACH Charter, which has been extremely valuable, but that we also consider what the next steps could be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. I now request our last presenters, Supriya and Mukul, to please present.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be in this gathering of heritage lovers and scholars. Mukul is here with me. I'm presenting on our behalf. I'm trying to share my slide now. Is it visible?
Yes.
Yeah. Towards an effective conservation approach for sacred groves, case studies from Pune District. Myself, Supriya Mahabaleshwarkar, and with me, we have Mukul Mahabaleshwarkar. Sacred groves is an ancient practice of dedicating forests to a deity. It is associated with several taboos which restrict access to these groves and which don't allow any disturbance to these groves. Thus, these have been protected over a long period of time through history and are climax forests which are rich in biodiversity. There is a very close association of the communities that have protected these through their culture and religion. These represent alternative worldviews where human and nature are much closer to each other and much in harmony. However, in today's changing times, their survival is at stake. We are looking to understand existential challenges of sacred groves in Pune District in context of these changing times and developmental pressures. The methodology we adopted was field visits and ground truthing to assess the status and ecological health of 50 such sacred groves in Pune District. Stakeholders of these sacred groves were identified. Opinion survey was conducted, considering multiple aspects of sacred groves. A value and threatscape analysis was done, and legal provisions and policies for conservation were analyzed for identifying gaps in their implementation. Pune is located on the leeward side of the Western Ghats, one of the globally recognized biodiversity hotspots. It represents diverse climatic zones, and it is also one of the fastest growing cities in South Asia with a cutting-edge development sector. In India, More than 150,000 sacred groves have been estimated, of which Maharashtra has documented 3,000 in the recent past. Pune, in our study, showed presence of 430 sacred groves. Looking at their health and the survival status, 10% of these groves are lost now. They have been submerged under water because of construction of dams for the growing needs of Pune city. 22% are surviving, whereas 68% have a serious conservation concern, as these do not fall under formal protected areas. The ownership patterns vary from family-owned groves to village-owned groves. Many of the village groves in Pune are village-owned. Some have formalized a management committee. Some have a temple trust that is associated in the management. Some fall under the forest department, while other government departments like the revenue departments also have ownership of some of these. The local communities, of course, are very closely associated with these groves. But there are so many other stakeholders that are involved and that influence these groves. The government departments, as I mentioned earlier. Then there are other interventions like some NGOs, some social workers who have been working in these rural areas. It has been an interest of research for many botanists especially, and the surrounding urban centers, of course, are one of the major stakeholders, as there has been a growing interest of tourism in these areas. And they also act as economic centers which attract the rural youth, which are moving out from these areas for better job prospects. As we studied them for their ecological health, it was observed that these are forest patches which look strikingly different than their surroundings. They must have been continuous earlier on the Western Ghats mountain ranges. However, they now look like islands because only these patches have been protected because of the traditional taboos, whereas the rest of the area was cut down. It was not protected. Hence, these are the last remnants of these primeval forests and act as repositories of rich biodiversity. These are climax forests which harbor rich biodiversity, which includes many rare, threatened, endemic species. They include elements like giant climbers not seen anywhere else in that area, indigenous old-growth trees. These also perform important ecosystem functions like acting as protectors of the origin of headwaters of our rivers, groundwater recharge, preventing soil erosion, energy and nutrient cycling, and so on. Interestingly, the traditional belief systems incorporates all of these ecosystem services. They have a knowledge of how the grove actually contributes to the well-being of overall health of people and the nature there. Looking at the ecological values, out of the 50 groves that were studied, all of them showed presence of important endemic species. More than half of them are supporting origin of streams. More than half of them have rare and endangered species present in them, and half of them have a catchment function that they perform. Coming to the cultural aspects of these groves, these are pre-agrarian hunter-gatherer era practice, which have been carried on over generations. So these represents primitive deities like the fierce mother goddess cults. Most of these are aniconic, called Tandala in the vernacular, and they must have took on anthropomorphic forms in the later period. There are a number of folklores associated with sacred groves and these deities. These folklores incorporate stories like the story of origin of that grove, associated taboos related to restriction of access, related to restriction of harvesting of certain resources from these groves, and so on. There is a dedicated professionals like Gurav or the Bhagat, which is a hereditary occupation, who are assigned with the role of performing rituals. Sometimes they also perform an additional role of traditional healers. These offerings are sometimes daily. In other areas, it could be like an annual festival that the village celebrates together as they try to pay their worship and placate the deity for the well-being of the community. The role of the deity is also like an elderly person in the house through which permissions are sought. There is a process called ritual called kaul, which is applied as a permission granting process, seeking permission for things even including like important decisions of farming activities like harvesting and sowing and so on. Health issues, ailments are sought for health issues. These groves also give a sense of cultural identity to the community, and they also support social harmony in the village. Non-wood produce like wild edible plants and ethnomedicine also play a role in these communities. There are certain permissions granted for non-wood produce harvesting. These wild edible plants play a role in supporting the well-being through micronutrient supply for these villagers. And medicinal plants traditions continue even today. Some of these are extracted through permissions. Some of these groves, these villages are located in very inaccessible regions in the high altitudes of the Western Ghats. Where
Gupta, you have 2 minutes.
Sorry?
You have 2 minutes remaining.
Noted. Thank you. So I'll move on to the threatscape. We observe that the most serious threat, the most common threats, the common one was grazing. It was observed in these sacred groves because of the taboos being diluted, and there is a change in the surrounding landscape which was available earlier for grazing, but now these lands are being sold off. The ownership pattern is changing. These lands are being fenced and thus inaccessible for the cattle herders. So eventually this common property resource comes to aid. Taboos are diluted and we observe grazing in many of these groves. Urban development is another serious concern where urbanization is adding a lot of pressures, building of roads, construction, and adding pressures on these groves. Construction inside sacred groves is also observed because the villagers are trying to build temples. Earlier, these were natural deities, violent deities staying in forest, but now the villagers have changed perceptions and belief systems and feel there should be a constructed temple, which also acts as a sense of identity. So because of these changes, these groves have been threatened. A number of legal provisions have been identified which are already existing, like the Biodiversity Act. However, what we observed was there is lack of implementation mechanism and clarity in implementation process. It also does not take care of socio-cultural aspects related to these groves, which are very important for the continuity of these traditions. Human-wildlife conflicts and other environmental aspects are not really addressed here, and it creates confusion about how these can be implemented for protection of these groves. So looking at the stakeholder feedback, what we observed was a value-based approach through identifying values that could contribute to the conservation of these groves in today's times. The highest rated one was ecological environmental value, which emerged as the most important one, followed by others like heritage, hydrological, geological, and so on. So in conclusion, we believe that an interdisciplinary approach that integrates multiple perspectives of diverse stakeholders is important for a complex system like sacred groves. These are site-specific conservation issues, so we cannot straitjacket a one model fits for all kind of system, but there has to be site-specific interventions and management measures which evolve with the community together can be more effective. And a comprehensive cultural mapping of these sacred groves is necessary as guidelines given by INTACH and UNESCO, which can form a strong baseline for further conservation models. Thank you.
Thank you, Supriya. I now invite our session chairs, Dr. Priyaleen and Divay sir, to please share their remarks.
Divay, you want to go first?
No, please go ahead, Priyaleen. More your subject, actually.
Not really. Everybody's subject.
Hmm.
Okay, so very diverse kind of, so it's not really my subject because it covers forts to whatever, the Spiti Valley, vernacular housing, vernacular heritage, uh, sacred groves, historic gardens, well, the whole, so yeah, it was a very diverse kind of an afternoon. Yes. So I thought, okay, I'll say individually, just very briefly, because I think we are running out of time also. But collectively, I would say that, well, the objectives, methodology, and the findings, I think all presentations, yes, were very well structured, and you stuck to the time, you were very precise. All that was very fine. Um, but what and having been, again, I would say 40 years in the profession, I would just say that, we are still hearing the same things that we heard, that one knows of. Huh? For example, like going presentation wise, the first presentation, which is Kimberley's, yes, you are talking about very specific Spiti Valley, but perhaps the issues pertain to the entire trans-Himalayan. I think, we are talking about the architects coming from the plains. We are talking about people's aspirations. We are talking about crafts disappearing. We're talking about traditional wisdom being there. And we are talking about tourism. So what I would, and this maybe that was not your mandate, because they're all well-researched topics, each one of yours. Where do we go from here? That is the question. And so there, I would say, like the first case study, I would want to know, well, what was the traditional management system and where has it gone wrong? Because still we don't know where it's gone wrong. I mean, we can keep saying that the people's aspirations are changing, but why are they changing? If we are talking about people coming from the plains, the architects coming and designing and the material, why are they coming? So till we don't address the why, I think we'll just keep talking about the same thing because issues we are all very familiar with. They're the same, resonating over time, resonating over projects, resonating over sites. And I think if we, maybe the next seminar or the next symposium really should be focusing on that where is it going wrong? I mean, in the sense that points which we can then address specifically. And here I have like for the first presentation. Now, if you're talking about tourism, and this is also shared, I think, with the second presentation also, because there also tourism came in, and in fact, even in the forts, it'll probably come in. Is there a thing called sustainable tourism? Because tourism, we keep saying, is a double-edged sword. So even if you have homestays, the tourist is going to come in with another culture and is going to leave a bit of that culture there. So then how is that, your culture going to be conserved, so to speak? So I mean, one needs to, I think, even now begin to look at tourism with very, very critical eyes. I mean, we're reading in the newspapers how people in Istanbul or Spain, in a big way, they are revolting against, or Venice for that matter, and the local residents are just saying we don't want tourism. So maybe we haven't reached that stage in the hills, in the Trans-Himalayan region, but I think we are slowly getting there. So let's be a little more innovative and find answers that how we can conserve without the help of tourism. I mean, so that was my one broad observation. And of course, I'm also commenting on really what you presented and your abstracts. Unfortunately, one did not see the full papers. So maybe many of these things are spoken in delved deeper in the papers, but so that unfortunately we don't have access to that. So the first was the first paper, it was very, very well presented and to the point, but I would just want to explore this aspect, that why put our eggs in the basket of tourism? Let's think of other ways in which. The second presentation, I would just say again in the paper, in the abstract, you've used the word preservation a lot. So I think we need to make a distinction between preservation and conservation. Because preservation is a very static concept, whereas conservation is a very dynamic concept. So if we have to be careful with the kind of words that we use, because preservation means kind of freezing a thing in time. And I think no culture can be frozen in time. So we need to just be a little cautious on the words that we use. And, here again, lack of awareness. I mean, that's something which is running across all all over the world, one would say. So, but then how are we going to address it? To just say lack of awareness is. Third presentation, on forts. I mean, I would like to know what is now the future of these forts. You made a case that a new typology of forts need to be looked at, like they need to be qualified as cultural landscapes. Fine. And there are so many studies done on forts now. I think forts is the latest kind of, everybody's very interested in the forts of the coastal forts. And so a lot of work being done there. So yes, recognizing them as a typology, point well taken. But then what is the future of these forts? One would like to know that, because still we don't know that. We'll keep documenting, we'll keep coming to Jan's presentation. Yes, of course, very well chronicled all the then. And I would just say, Jan, there was one thing missing. You haven't included, because there are some publications which have come up. One of them authored by me on conserving the spirit of a historic garden in 2023. So, which is now looking at historic gardens. We are making a national register of historic. So, historic gardens are coming into, and the conservation is coming sort of on the radar of conservation architects and general public also. But there I would again say that from here, having chronicled it, we need to do. And you make a valid point that there needs to be a paradigm shift. But what is that paradigm shift? And there I can just maybe give one little, I also don't have the answers, but maybe just one clue, which is that now I think ecology has to be the paramount thing. Heritage, everything else needs to go in the background, because if ecology is there, and given this whole thing about climate change and everything, if ecology is paramount, maybe some of the answers we'll get from there. For example, that canal which you said, which under the smart city they are making those, maybe they will not do that if ecology was the paradigm which was guiding everything, which was guiding development. Again, easier said than done, because you can say that, we need to start looking at ecology, but it has to be backed by politics. And I always say conservation is a political act. It has to, if the politics, if the governments are not really, into it, we are just talking in the air. We'll get nowhere if our planning mechanisms don't incorporate heritage within them. We are just working in our little islands, conserving a building, restoring a garden, restoring a fort, conserving a fort. But till it's not built into the whole planning system, I think we are just, and this maybe in the collective panel discussion, we'll have more talk on this. And of course, I have also a comment to make on this whole smart city, because India just seems to be taken over by, I firmly believe that no city can be smart, and unequal city can never be a smart city, like where you have the poor and, that gap is there. You can keep doing these infrastructure projects, but the smart city is sort of a very weird concept, to say that cities, and unfortunately, conservation architects are also on the bandwagon of smart cities, which is a little unfortunate. So that was it. Okay, and the last one, yes, about the sacred groves. Again, I would say, we are well aware of the issues, but why are sacred groves disappearing? And we have to get to the crux of the problem, because just to say that urbanization is coming in, and no, why is urbanization coming in? I think we now are at a stage where we need to be thinking about innovative new things. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Divay, over to you. Sorry if I took too much time.
Not at all, Priyaleen. In fact, you made my thing easier, because I think you've covered mostly everything. I'll rather resonate but not repeat. I will perhaps not give specific comments, but maybe just sort of threads. And like I think Priyaleen said, that the objectives are very well defined, and we all know the needs. The methodologies are pretty strong as well. But I feel that we really need to look at findings, which is the third part, little differently. And perhaps one of the answers could be also to be able to quantify the traditional knowledge, before we jump to solutions. I think Jan sort of made that point that there is this sort of urge as designers, or even Kim said she's not a designer or not an architect, but she still chose to jump to a solution in an architectural form. So I think we need to really look beyond design solutions. Maybe I think a lot of you did talk about socioeconomic things, but then those I didn't see or hear what are the reforms or what are the innovations you're wanting to bring into those aspects. We tend to really focus a little bit more on the design aspects, or more so-called project orientation. In fact, Kim sort of mentioned about ramming the earth to a particular compaction, which allows for better heat insulation or climatic response. Now, can we know that degree of compaction? Can that become like a standard for construction in the hills? So these are things that we perhaps needs to go a little bit maybe deep. Maybe that was not the aim of Kim, and maybe some other people can take up these research from what you have done. But I think we need to know a little bit more about these things before we jump to conclusions. The second thing I can maybe just add is that, and repeating that, perhaps when we talk of landscapes, we really need to look at it from everything from a more broader term, and what Priyaleen calls as ecology. And when we do talk about that, it requires us to really broaden our scope, to look at things in a much more broader frame, or even what were these forts doing, or what these forts can do, or what these buildings can also do. And there was this reuse proposal, I think Ashwathi did talk about. But again, there was a value judgment that why is it being made into a mall and not a museum? Based on what do we take those decisions? Is it only for the love of it? Or is it the socioeconomic aspects? Or is it so-called the balance effect? So those are things we have to really carefully maybe tread upon. And like what Priyaleen again said, come up with innovative solution. Maybe for the sacred groves, one of the most innovative technique could be to be able to ascertain their value as hubs for traditional medicine. And maybe that way it can maybe save them, that these are repository of certain medicinal species which are not available. In fact, in the hills, I don't recall, I think in Uttarakhand or Sikkim, there was this medicinal plant, which is, it's actually not a plant, it's actually a fungus or something, which grows somewhere up in the upper reaches of Badrinath. And I think there was a lot of development proposal there, but I think villagers fought against it because that fungus sort of cost like about, I don't know, in millions of dollars, and they sell it to Japan or something. I mean, it's supposedly used in some Japanese traditional medicine, and those developments were stopped. So yes, we do need to look at more quantitative aspects of our work, as well as from that create more innovative solutions. But yes, I mean, I loved all the presentations, and they were diverse in some ways, but also similar in several ways. So thank you for all of this. Thank you.
Does any of the presenter have anything to say or share?
I would just like to thank both of you for your reflections and intellectual engagement with the topic of my article. And it is something that, being located in Spiti for many, many years, for more than 9 years, the effects of tourism are well and truly understood from my perspective. So I do appreciate that it is a very complicated topic, but from my perspective, as someone who is, one, intellectually engaging with it, but also practically trying to have an impact on conserving culture in that region, as it's changing very fast. We don't necessarily have 10 years to think about the ideal outcome. It's happening right now. So from my perspective, at the moment, in terms of engaging with tourism in this way, it's just to give a different dialogue and offer a different pathway for the people in Spiti Valley to choose. At the moment, their idea of tourism development are those RCC structures. So, and it's happening immediately. Within a matter of 2 years, people completely wiped out all of the earthen architecture in the main town of Kaza. There are maybe 2 or 3 buildings left. So it's a rapid transition that Spiti is facing. But in saying all of that, I absolutely agree. It's not the ideal solution because it's also very expensive. The reason that I have to do it in tourism is so that I can recuperate the investment that it takes in order to show that alternative model. So I would be more than happy if we find another pathway that doesn't require that is something else. So absolutely, I agree that alternatives, and tourism is also highly, we saw with COVID as well, how fragile it is and how quickly it can disappear. So it's a risky pathway to rely on as well. So absolutely, I appreciate your input and your engagement with the subject. So these are things definitely in the future that I will keep in mind and keep researching.
I can maybe add a few things. First of all, thank you very much to all presenters and the shares. Everybody presented really wonderful presentations, and I'm amazed how well structured everybody did that. And it shows actually how broad the topic of landscape can be, and how to build heritages as well. In the presentation, I've tried to present that we are now talking about a broad landscape, a living landscape. We can speak about an ecology, and absolutely wonderful new publications are coming out by people within the field, and Priyaleen, yours as well. And but what we see is, if we think about 81, the Historic Garden Charter, we're 45 years later, actually, there's no implementation of any of these. Well, there is a level of implementation, of course. It's not nothing that happens. Progress has been made. I must say, in the context of Kashmir, I'm pretty amazed how slowly skills and expertise is building up. But there is a fundamental issue, and I think it relates to that point you make about politics and the economy. And it seems almost as if we've detached ourselves so much as human beings from actually ecology and landscape that we don't see it anymore. We don't read the landscape anymore. We don't know what we're really doing. And it's becoming very dramatic. And Kashmir, which had been known as this ecological haven in that sense and cultural haven, it's actually, it's such a stark contrast of what we see. And I spoke about participation and equity in the urban process, and I'm just in some ways an observer who tries to document. And now I'm speaking up about a few things because I see actually that we are at a critical point that if we don't save a number of places, then it's gonna I don't know where it ends. But as I'm also not from Kashmir, so I also feel like it's not my voice to say exactly what needs to happen. But I just hope that somewhere that there can be a shift in how we approach things. And I think the way forward, what I've said for many years, is that we can't resolve such issues in one go. You can't. But it would be great if we see really great trial projects, examples. And imagine that you do actually something like Shalimar Canal, but in a really, really good way. I mean, it's still subjective what you do, but that will show examples and then raise awareness amongst a community and so on. So that's what I'd hope, that there can be like exemplary projects that take a step-by-step forward. Thank you.
So I think we can then end the session for now, and I would request everybody to join back at 2:30 for the panel discussion among the chairs. And thank you so much for this session to the chairs and the presenters. This was a great learning experience, and I wish you all the best and hope you keep doing the good work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.